Okay, good afternoon, and sorry to keep you waiting. I know that everybody will say, oh, the usual Italian, always late, but actually it was a little taxi accident that the driver had, and it took half an hour to solve it, so I'm sorry. My name is Pio D'Emilia. I'm today moderating this press conference for a very, very important, although not very known issue, which is the cluster bomb issue. And the speakers today are, well, starting from my right here is Maaike Project Officer of PAX, and then Firoz Alizada, Communication Manager. I think that Firoz will speak first, and then Maaike. I wanted to make a very short presentation, but we were late 10 minutes. I will cut it very short. I just think as a human being and also as a journalist that there are no right wars, and there is no justification for any war ever, but certainly there are more cruel ways of managing or fighting a war. And although it's very bad to say this is human, this is inhuman, you know, in these days we have President Trump around trying to make a difference from inside the evil, but I don't think there is any big difference. But these cluster munitions, cluster bombs, are something really, really mini. And I myself thought that at least in the civilized country we got rid of them. But apparently they are still around and they do a lot of damage, even now. So we will hear from this first from Firoz Alizada. Please.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Firoz Alizada. I work for the Cluster Munition Coalition in Geneva. Cluster Munition Coalition, CMC, is a global network of civil society organizations. We have membership in about 100 countries, like the ICBL or the Japan campaign to ban landmine in Tokyo. Similar membership we have in about 100 countries. The CMC is, the goal of CMC is to ban cluster bombs. And our hope is that we can celebrate one day of a world free of cluster munitions. So I have the pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for your participation. I assume that some of you have already covered the issue of cluster munitions, since the government of Japan has been one of the leaders in promoting the Convention on Cluster Munitions. But a very short introduction of what is cluster munitions, what is cluster weapons. What you see on the screen, I'm not going to go into details, it's a little technical as well, but you have received a one-pager that explains what is cluster munitions in Japanese. I guess you have received that, and it was prepared by my colleagues at ICBL. So cluster munitions are dropped from aircraft or fired from the ground or sea, and they open up in the mid-air and release tens of sub-munitions. And they cover like several sides of a football field. I will explain more what is really why we needed to ban cluster bombs. There are two major problems with cluster bombs. First, that because when it's used, it covers a wide area, and therefore it cannot distinguish between civilians and military. Usually when cluster munitions are used in civilian populated areas, a lot of civilians fall victim to cluster munitions. And there are a lot of examples and a lot of reports that we have and other organizations have researched and provided the evidence before the cluster munitions was banned. And the other major problem is that when the war ends, the cluster munition will continue to harm civilians, just like landmines. Probably you are more familiar with landmines. Some from 2 to 30% of submunitions do not explode. So they remain, they are sort of victim activated as soon as someone stepped on it or touched it or go close to it, or children are playing with some types of submunitions that are very attractive. They are like toys, and they goes off and then cause a lot of bad casualties. There has been a lot of reports, but they are not a concrete number that I can give you in terms of the victims of cluster munitions. We say tens of thousands. Some estimate up to 55,000 cluster munition survivors have been recorded, casualties have been recorded. And out of that, about from 90 to 99% of them have been civilians. As you see on the screen, the largest percentage of cluster munition victims are in Asia, mostly in Laos and Vietnam, and followed by some countries in the Middle East, like Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. But there are a lot more countries that are affected by cluster munitions, like Afghanistan, my own country. By far, Laos and Vietnam are some of the most affected by cluster munitions, and they are still, a lot of civilians still lose their limbs and lives. Because of the nature of cluster munitions, which is a little different from landmines, when it explodes, multiple people can get injured or killed in one accident. And it's also worth to say that when we say survivors, that applies only to people who are directly get killed or maimed, injured by cluster munitions. When we say victims, it also counts their family members and also counts the affected communities. So if you include all of them, then the number of those who are victimized by cluster munitions is much higher. The international community and civil society and everyone that were exposed to dangers of cluster munitions came to a conclusion that we've got to ban it. In 2008, Norwegian government started a process called Oslo Process, and in 2008 we've got the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which is a legally binding international convention. It comprehensively bans all types of cluster munitions. And to date, we've got 119 nations that have joined the convention, out of which we've got, until yesterday, it was 100 state parties, and today is 101. Yesterday, the Madagascar also ratified, which was a great news. In Asia and Pacific, we've got the country that you see on the screen. They have joined the convention, but a vast majority of this region is still have not joined the convention, which we as CMC, the ICBL, and other colleagues like PACS, and those governments that have joined the convention work and encourage other governments to join the convention. In a nutshell, some of the achievements of the convention have been like 18 states that used to produce cluster munition, they stopped after the convention was entered into force for them. The government of the United States suspended transferring of cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia last year. Maaike, my colleague, will talk more, but Textron is one of the major producers of class munitions and arms in the US that last year announced that they will not produce class ammunition anymore. And there's a company in Singapore that they also halted class ammunition, although Singapore is not part of the convention, although the government of the United States is not part of the convention yet. And 1.4 million class munitions that containing 172 million submunitions have been already destroyed. So the convention works quite fast. And there's a lot of countries that are doing clearance and victim assistance, national legislation. There's a lot going on. But the main discussion of today is the campaign to stop explosive investments. This campaign is a sub-campaign of the class ammunition. We work closely with our member packs in the Netherlands. This campaign is informed by the report that will be released today, and Maaike will speak about it. The aim of the campaign is to end all financial investments in companies that produce class munitions. We work and we encourage states to adopt national legislations to ban investments, to outlaw any investment that goes into producers of class munitions. And this campaign and the fact that financial institutions stop funding producers helps the convention's norm to grow. We think that the biggest aim of the convention is to ban class munitions. And therefore, it does not make sense for anyone to still continue investing in companies that produce class munitions. There's one article in the convention that some states translated in a different way than us, but we firmly and strongly believe that the convention bans all involvement in class munitions because it bans the weapon. There are still, unfortunately, a number of countries that have joined the convention, but they still allow financial institutions in their countries to invest in companies that produce class munitions. As you see on the screen, there are Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Spain, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. In some of those countries, we have more financial institutions that are involved in investing in producers of class munitions. In others, there are few. But to fulfill their obligations under the Convention on Class Munitions, we call on all these countries and everyone else to stop investing in companies that produce the weapon. It's totally unacceptable that billions of dollars are invested in producers of a weapon that's globally banned, that's outlawed by the Convention on Class Munitions. The weapon that have been used in a lot of countries that still maim and kill civilians. And unfortunately, this is ongoing as we speak here. The weapon continue to kill and maim children and civilians in Syria and Yemen, because the use of this weapon is ongoing for the past many years by Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, by Syrian and Russian forces in Syria, which we urge them to stop without further delay. This is my last slide, and these are just to emphasize on some of the messages that we as the Class Munition Coalition, as civil society activists, like to urge the financial institutions to stop investing in companies that produce class munitions. We encourage state parties to the convention, including the government of Japan, to take action in order to prohibit any investments by all financial institutions living, located in their countries, in their territories. And those states that have not adopted the national legislation, we call on them to enact national legislation to ban any investment in any form, in any types. And obviously, we encourage all the producers of cluster munitions to stop producing cluster munitions. Some of them are listed in the report, but as the report also highlights, it's not, there are a lot more companies that produce cluster munitions, but they are not included in the report that Maaike will tell you about that. So I stop here. You have received the CMC's press release. It's 2-pager, and there's, at the very end of the press release, you find some more information about the Stop Explosive Investment campaign, and about the campaign, the cluster munition campaign, and the convention and everything else. But we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, I guess, at the very end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's keep on with Maaike. Please have your presentation, and then we will move to the questions and answers.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Maaike. I'm a co-author of the 2017 update of the report Worldwide Investments in Cluster Munitions. That's this really big report. I'm really happy to be here in Tokyo, and today I will speak about the way that investments in producers of cluster munitions contribute to the continued production of these banned weapons. PAX has published this report since 2009. Together with the Cluster Munitions Coalition, we are involved in the Stop Explosive Investments campaign. And today I will discuss the findings of our latest report. But first I would like to show you a short video about the campaign. Let's see if it works.
When you deposit money in the bank, do you know where it goes? Banks and other financial institutions invest or provide other financial services to companies which produce cluster munitions. It's impossible for a financial institution to be sure that the financial service it provides these producers of cluster munitions will not go to the production of this internationally banned weapon. And while stockpiles of cluster munitions exist, there's always a risk that will be used in current or future conflicts. 94% of casualties from cluster munitions are civilians, and of these, 40% are children. Unexploded submunitions cause a problem for days, months, even years after a conflict has ended, and it's civilians who bear the brunt. It's time for financial institutions to take responsibility and stop explosive investments.
Thank you. So when cluster bombs are used, it is simply not possible to distinguish between military and civilian targets, and it is not possible to protect civilians from these weapons. For example, in Yemen, where cluster bombs have been used since 2015, over 90% of all known casualties were civilians, including deminers. And of this, at least 22% were children. And that is why, as Firoz already said, cluster bombs must never be used again. And most countries in the world agree with this. And that is why they have banned cluster bombs with the 2008 Convention on Cluster Munitions, of which Japan is also a state party. And as Firoz said, we also got the good news that Madagascar is now also a state party. However, there are some countries that have not joined this convention, and in those countries there are still companies that continue to produce cluster bombs. And these countries include the United States, China, and South Korea. And there are some banks and other investment firms in other countries that continue to invest in these companies that make cluster bombs. Now, without money, there can be no production. And by investing in these companies, financial institutions contribute to the continued production of these banned weapons. So this includes financial institutions from countries that have joined the Convention on Cluster Bombs, and this also includes financial institutions from Japan. So with our report, we aim to name and shame those financial institutions that contribute to the production of cluster bombs by investing in money in the companies that produce them. So in the most recent update of our report, we found that in the past 4 years, so between June 2013 and March 2017, 166 financial institutions invested $31 billion in 6 producers of cluster munitions. So the 6 producers of cluster munitions that are in our report are China Aerospace Science and Industry from China, Hanwha, Norinco, Orbital ATK, Pungsan, and Textron. Now, as Firoz said, please note that this is not an exhaustive list. There are other producers of cluster bombs, but because the methodology we use, we have to restrict the list that we include in our report. So, for example, because we research investments in these companies, companies that are state or privately owned cannot be included in our report. So the 166 investors listed in the Hall of Shame of our report are from 14 different countries. Sorry, that was the list. From 14 different countries, and by far the largest amount was invested by financial institutions from the United States, and they make up 69% of the investments in the Hall of Shame. However, Asian financial institutions also provide large amounts of investments to these producers. And the report lists 30 financial institutions from Asian countries. There are 27 from China, 30 from China, 27 from South Korea, 5 from Taiwan, 4 from Japan, 2 from Singapore, and 1 from India. And together they invested over $7 billion of the 31 total that we found. So today, especially interesting is that we found 4 Japanese financial institutions that together invested almost $2 billion in these 6 producers. Now, Japan has joined the Convention on Cluster Munitions. So why would it allow investments in companies that continue to make these weapons that it has itself prohibited? So investing contributes to the production of cluster bombs. And 119 countries, including Japan, have decided to ban these bombs. So ending investments in these producers is a shared responsibility of both governments and financial institutions. And our report therefore also shows good examples of governments and financial institutions that have decided to ban these investments and that are taking the lead in ending this practice. So the report's Hall of Fame shows 42 financial institutions that have adopted fully comprehensive policies preventing them from investing in cluster bomb producers. Now, as for the Hall of Shame, the Hall of Fame and runners-up categories are also not exhaustive. So there are probably much more, but these are just to indicate the good practices. The report's runners-up list 46 financial institutions that have also adopted policies, but their policies contain some loopholes, so they're not perfect policies. And we offer some suggestions to these banks and other investment firms to help them improve their policies and totally get out of the cluster bomb investors. So we urge all financial institutions from around the world to follow the example of these 88 frontrunners that have already adopted policies prohibiting investments, because that is the only way to fully end all investments in cluster bomb producers. Now, I would like to give you some examples of the Japanese financial institutions mentioned in the report. So of the 166 financial institutions in the Hall of Shame, only 15 are from countries that have already joined the convention. And of these 15, 4 are from Japan, so that is a significant number. We found that these 4 Japanese investment firms together invested almost $2 billion, as I said. And the investment institutions are the Dai-ichi Life Insurance Company, Mitsubishi UFG Financial, Oryx Corporation, and Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Groups. And we really urge these companies to make sure that they make no more investments in producers of cluster bombs. There were some reports in Japanese media last year that the Japanese Government Pension Investment Funds, GPIF, also invested in the producer Textron. They are not listed in our report's Hall of Shame. That has probably to do with difference in methodology, but we are sure that they did make those investments. So the Japanese investment fund should also take its responsibility here. Now, there are also some Japanese financial institutions that are showing more leadership. So the runners-up chapter lists Japanese Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Bank. Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Bank has a policy prohibiting investments in cluster bombs. And their policy is not perfect, but they are showing leadership, and they are showing that they acknowledge the fact that cluster bomb producers are not good investment partners. Now, also from Japan are Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group, which I already mentioned before, Mitsuo Financial Group, and Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group. These financial institutions have adopted some policies banning these investments, but their policies are severely limited and contain severe loopholes. Their policy is to only exclude investment for project financing. However, we have never come across a project intended to finance specifically cluster munitions production. And financial institutions cannot guarantee that the funds they lend to a cluster bomb producer will not be used to produce cluster munitions. So if a company is involved in the production of cluster bombs, the entire company should be excluded from investments. And these financial institutions do not do that. So as I mentioned before, Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group invested in American cluster bomb producers Textron and Orbital ATK for almost $1 billion US. So it is definitely a step in the right direction that these financial institutions explicitly mention cluster bombs in their exclusion policies. It shows their understanding that cluster munitions are horrendous and banned weapons that should not be used or produced. We welcome that fact that these institutions have taken a first step, and we encourage them to go all the way towards banning investments in cluster bomb producers completely. Now, Japan is a state party to the Cluster Munition Convention, which prohibits not only the use of cluster munitions, but also assistance with all the other prohibited acts. And we believe that any financing of a cluster bomb producer would contravene the convention, as it would be a form of assistance. So therefore, the Japanese government also has an important role to play here. The fact that Japanese financial institutions are still investing in cluster bomb producers, even though Japan is a state party, show that it's essential that states parties make clear that they believe financing is also prohibited by the convention. And therefore, we urge Japan to adopt national legislation prohibiting investment in cluster bomb producers, like 10 countries elsewhere in the world have already done. And in this way, Japan could play an exemplary role to other countries in the region. And Japan should also call actively on its neighbors, including, of course, South Korea and China, to become a state party to the Cluster Munitions Convention and to stop all production of cluster bombs. Now, all governments that have recognized the unacceptable harm caused by cluster munitions should make sure they also end all investment in cluster bomb producers. And a growing group of states agrees this, and that any financing of a cluster bomb producer contravenes the convention. So, as Firoz already mentioned, Article 1 of the Convention prohibits assistance. And in 2015, countries adopted the Dubrovnik Action Plan, which states that states parties may wish to consider enacting national legislation prohibiting investments in producers of cluster munitions. Now, there are some 30 states leading the way. 38 states. As I said, there are 10 countries that have adopted national legislation prohibiting investments in cluster bomb producers. This includes my own country, the Netherlands. And there are 28 countries that have made an interpretive statement saying that they also believe that investments are banned by the convention, but they have not yet adopted national legislation. Now, past experience shows that this divestment by financial institutions from producers really has a practical effect. So in 2015, Singapore Technologies announced that they would end the production of cluster bombs. And only last summer, so the summer of 2016, the United States-based company Textron announced that it would also end the production of cluster bombs in 2017, the first quarter of 2017. However, they will still be making deliveries of cluster bombs according to contracts they have for the rest of this year. And that's why they are still included in our report as a producer, because they will still be delivering cluster bombs they have already made. So if Textron does indeed end its involvement in the production of cluster bombs by the end of the year, and by implication, by the way, also Orbital ATK, because they are in our report because they produce the rocket motor of Textron's cluster bomb. So if Textron does indeed get out of this business by the end of the year, they would be the last United States-based company getting out of the cluster bomb business. And that would also mean that the remaining producers of cluster munitions are from Asian countries, including China and South Korea. And we are in Tokyo this week because with the last US-based companies getting out of this business, now is the time for financial institutions and the government of Japan, as well as other Asian countries, to really step up and make sure they also stop contributing to the production of these horrendous and banned weapons. So I'd like to wrap up with some conclusions. We have seen that cluster bombs are unacceptable weapons that have been banned internationally because of the harm they cause to civilians. Investments in companies that produce these weapons can contribute to the continued production of these weapons. And therefore, financial institutions should divest from these producers and formally adopt policies that make sure they will never invest again in the future. And all governments should also adopt national legislation prohibiting these investments. So, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them later, or you can also contact us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very horrible to hear all of these things. So, we have questions from the floor, working press. First, as usually, please raise your hand and state your name and affiliation, if you have one. Yes, please. Yeah, please come to the microphone because we are recording. Yes.
Could you please put on this?
Okay.
You will speak in Japanese.
私朝日新聞社という日本の新聞社の記者をやっております、豊と申します。これまでその欧州でですね、この灯油酒が禁止される、ことになった、それが可能になった理由とですね、その経験から、日本が何を学べるのかということについて教えていただけますでしょうか。はい。
Thank you. Is that answer right?
Yeah, you can answer in English, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, so for example, in the Netherlands, which I think is a good example in this area, investments in producers of cluster munitions have been banned. That was the result of parliamentary action very much. Legislation is not perfect, so there are some reservations made, but we have seen in the Netherlands that nearly all financial institutions, some of you may know, for example, ING, which I think is active internationally, these investments have gone down significantly. So this year we found only very small investments by 2 financial institutions from the Netherlands, Aegon, an insurance company, and ING. But if we compare it from the period before legislation was adopted and before the convention, that has gone down dramatically. So there's a really practical impact, and I think this is the most efficient way of ending these investments.
Please.
My name is Hiroki Fujita, freelance journalist with the Yuka Fuji Evening Tabloid. I'm wondering why the Japanese government cannot stop those financial institutions to invest to such a corporate firms?
Thank you. So, of course, financial institutions take their own decisions, and they often decide to exclude companies even when it's legal to invest in them. For example, companies making tobacco are quite often excluded from investments. And as we've shown with this report, there are many financial institutions that do also on their own account exclude cluster munitions producers, but not all of them do. Some companies may feel that it's not yet illegal what they do, so they can freely go ahead with it. They are not very much interested in what their money is being used to do. And that's why governments really need to provide clarity to these financial institutions by adopting legislation or making an interpretive statement. Make it clear to these financial institutions that this is not acceptable, because apparently some of them cannot conclude that themselves.
Can I add? Yes, please.
As Maaike said, I think probably the way that the government of Japan translate that Article 21C is not the same as we believe, or the same as other states parties to the conventions have adopted national legislation. But the government, to my knowledge, has not expressed any views on that. So it's worth to also say that the government of Japan is one of the biggest donor of mine action, meaning that provides a lot of money to get rid of cluster munitions that were used in Laos, in Vietnam, in a lot of different countries, provide assistance to victims. And being a leading state parties, it does not make sense not to allow financial investments to go to in companies that produce cluster munitions. So therefore, once again, we like to emphasize the fact that we hope and we encourage the government to take action and to stop those 4 financial institutions that was not big, but in terms of amount of money, which is 2 billion out of 31 billion of overall, that's quite significant to stop those companies. By doing so, it will not only send a message to those producers to stop production of cluster munitions, but also it helps the norm of the convention to grow and to get stronger, and hopefully to get rid of cluster munitions once and for all.
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
すいません、東京新聞の記者で望月磯子と申します。ちょっと今日のクラスターから少し広げた話なんですけど、日本はご存知かもしれないんですが、2014年の4月に今の第二次安倍政権が閣議決定したことで、武器輸出三原則というのが禁止が撤廃されまして、新たにいわゆる武器を製造したり開発したりする企業への投融資も実質的に三原則撤廃によって認められることになっています。で、現在今回のお話ではクラスター爆弾というところに限定されて、それに対する抗議ということなんですけども、今の日本政府の方で進めていこうとしている政策は、クラスターには限らということではないんですが、別の武器産業とか製造設備に対する投融資は三原則が撤廃されたことで、法的には問題ないというふうになっております。このことに対してご意見等どういうふうに考えられているかというのをちょっと広いお話なんですけどご指摘いただければ幸いです。
So maybe if I can clarify, you're saying the Japanese government has adopted principles that will stop the export of weapons, of these cluster bombs. Is that good translation?
Yes, it's the release of these principles that the Japanese government used to have.
Okay, yeah.
So it's now able to export munitions.
Allows them.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I didn't know that, but it sounds like it only sort of amplifies our call for the Japanese government to reconsider this decision. So I'm not sure what the reasons were for releasing these principles. So yeah, that would be a good question to ask them as to what they hope to achieve with this.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, maybe Mochiko-san can say more about that, but what I can say is that any involvement that helps the production of cluster munition or their use or transfer or stockpiling would go against the convention. The convention is about banning cluster munitions. So I have not also studied or heard of the principles that you just said, but that is disappointing in any countries, including in Japan, that any principles, any policy that would allow a country to invest in production of a weapon that the country has joined to ban it. I'll see if my colleagues from the okay.
Hi, Gareth Allen from Bloomberg News. My questions are specific to Mitsubishi UFJ and Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group. A couple of questions for you. Firstly, what did those two companies say when you took these accusations to them?
We haven't asked them what they think of it. We have looked at the policies of some of them, as I mentioned in the report. And there it's clear that they do somehow acknowledge the fact that cluster bombs are unacceptable because they adopted some form of policy, but they just do not do enough to really prevent these investments from happening. So apparently they do not think it is important enough to really adopt comprehensive policies.
How can we rely on your evidence when you haven't asked the bank specifically whether it's true or not?
So for the Hall of Shame, the resources we use are Thomson Reuters database, Bloomberg database. So these are recognized databases where all financial institutions, or most of them, report their investments to. Of course, not every single transaction in the world is recorded there. So I would say that what we list is not everything there is, but it does show the size of the problem. We have had sometimes that financial institutions say, like, oh, the database forgot to update it. But that happens very, very rarely. So the data we use is reliable, even though it's not comprehensive. And for the Hall of Fame and runners-up, we do ask very detailed questions to all of these financial institutions.
If you ask Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group and Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group, they'll tell you they do not finance cluster bombs in any way, shape whatsoever. And they have explicit policies, which I know you said that they are lacking somewhat, but they seem pretty open and shut. It simply says, as does the Japanese Bankers Association, when they signed up in 2010, that all investments in or financing of cluster bombs is explicitly prohibited, and financing of companies that make cluster bombs, irrespective of whether the funds are going to be used for cluster bombs or otherwise, is prohibited, in a word. I mean, it seems pretty open and shut to me, and the banks themselves deny that they are doing this. So convince me that your information is better than the bank's information.
So I can't show you the database here and now, but I would if I could. If they think that if what we say is incorrect, but they have never approached us to say it is incorrect. And what is more often the case when financial institutions say we do not actually invest in cluster bomb producers, is that they do not consider specific types of investments to fall under that. So what happens often, for example, is that a loan to a company in general is not considered to be under their policy, because they say, oh, we think it's not used to make cluster bombs. What also happens is that specific types of asset management are not covered by the policy. For example, they say, well, it's a foreign subsidiary, so they cannot follow our policy. So there's all sorts of loopholes in policies that financial institutions make. And I think, as the financial institutions in the Hall of Fame show, when you really adopt a comprehensive policy and you implement it thoroughly, it is possible to have zero investments in cluster bomb producers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Tainaka from the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. And as you know, there is another ban treaty is under negotiation on the United Nations. It's about nuclear weapons. And their models are landmine and cluster munitions conventions to stigmatize those weapons and make it difficult to finance those weapons. But as you know, that United States, China, and also Japan don't join that negotiation because they say that nuclear weapons are totally different from the cluster munitions or anti-landmine. So do you have any message to those countries? Thank you.
I think PAX also works on nuclear weapons, and myself, I work on a similar report called Don't Bank on the Bomb about investments in nuclear weapons producers. So we are extremely happy that this ban treaty is being negotiated. Actually, the draft text was released yesterday. So the principle is the same. Companies that produce nuclear weapons are producing weapons that could destroy the Earth several times over. So financial institutions investing in those companies are contributing to the production of those weapons. And that is equally unacceptable as investing in cluster bomb producers. Now, the United States, of course, says they will not join the ban treaty. The United States has not joined the cluster munitions treaty. However, they have decided to end the export of cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia under Obama, because they saw that the harm these weapons were doing in Yemen was horrible. So even if they do not join the treaty immediately, which of course we do not expect them to, a treaty can have a very strong norm, especially in the long term, in changing the behavior of all states. So yeah, we are very happy with that development.
I think there was a gentleman there. Please go ahead. Yes.
東京新聞の厚見と申します。ですね、すみません、昨年のリストをもとにですね、世界の巨大金融グループでどういう状況かというのを調べてみたんですけども、ヨーロッパの方が大体時点で、日本が不名誉という形でなってたんですが、ヨーロッパの方は法律で禁止してもやっぱり名誉リストに入らず時点にとどまるというところ、そこの理由のところをもう少し詳しく伺いたいと思います。
Thank you. Yes, there are some very large European financial institutions in the runners-up. For example, I think Crédit Suisse and Crédit Agricole are ones that are very well known. Deutsche Bank. So I think what is important that these banks have recognized that investing in cluster bomb producers is not okay. And as you can see in the Hall of Shame, they have no or very little investments. So it also shows that adopting such a policy really helps limiting those investments, even if their policies are not comprehensive. And of course, we offer some suggestions on how they can improve those policies. And that is very important to really end all investments, and also as a matter of principle. But it's very important that also these really big financial institutions are showing that this is possible. Does that answer your question?
朝日新聞の藤田と申します。基本的なところを確認させてください。今日の記者会見というのは、PAX の年次報告書が出たことをきっかけに、すいません、ストップエクスプローシブインベストメンツの取り組みの一環として、行われたということでしょうかというのが一つ、あと2つあります。 でそのストップエクスプローシブインベストメンツの取り組みというのには世界のどのぐらいの NGO が参加していて、その中に日本の対人地雷キャンペーン、対人地雷の取り組みの NGO も参加されているんでしょうかというのが2つ目で、最後に世界の金融機関がですね、クラスター爆弾の企業に投資をしているという調査手法はさっきのお話ですとあまり詳しくは言えない秘密ということなんでしょうか。どういう調査をされてこういうふうに発表されたのか、言える範囲で教えていただければと思います。以上です。
Thank you for that question. The Stop Explosive Investment campaign is a sub-campaign of the Cluster Munition Coalition, which is a network of civil society organizations all over the world in 100 countries. For example, if you have had a chance to look at the press release on the second page, those national campaigns that are taking action today, because today is also a global day of action to stop explosive investments. Some of them are listed here, but this list is not also complete because it's only those national campaigns that have informed us they are taking action today. So there are in a lot of countries, I cannot give you an exact number now, but in a lot of countries out of these 100 countries where we have membership are taking action to stop explosive investments. In some countries, they have stopped taking action because they have achieved what they were, looking for. For example, in Belgium or the 10 countries that have comprehensive ban on explosive investments. Last year, the report was, for example, launched in Canada, in Ottawa, and just before the launch of the report, there were a couple of financial institutions that put policies that ban any investments into production of cluster munitions. So we work closely with PACs, and this campaign is basically informed by this report. That the name of the report is a long one. Maybe you can, if you had a chance to look at the reports, Worldwide Investments in Cluster Munitions, a Shared Responsibility. So this is the report, and that campaign is sort of a two different thing, but the campaign is informed by the report that we receive every year from our member PACs.
Thank you.
So regarding the methodology question, so the way we research the report is, for the Hall of Shame, we first compile the list of cluster bomb producers. So we now have 6 in a report. We do that by very extensive research into every evidence of cluster bomb production that we can find. For example, we also sometimes visit arms trade fairs where companies show off their cluster bombs. And then what we do is that a financial research company called Profundo from the Netherlands researches the databases that I just mentioned, so Thomson Reuters, Icon, Bloomberg databases, for all investments they can find in this short list of producers. So every publicly available information about investments in those producers, we compile into the Hall of Shame of the report. Now, for practical reasons, we cannot include every single investment because the report would be even bigger than it is already. So we use a threshold of about 1% for investments in companies, because otherwise it would just get too big. So investments below that threshold, we have that information. We also share it often with campaigners in countries so they can use it in their engagement with specific financial institutions. But they're not included always in this report. If you have any questions about specific financial institutions, we can always answer them based on that information. For the Hall of Fame and the runners-up, the process is a little bit different because we engage very much with the financial institutions listed there. We send them a very detailed questionnaire. So whenever we find out a financial institution seems to have a policy, we approach them with our questionnaire and ask them, for example, whether their policy covers all types of investments, whether their policy covers all types of cluster bombs, because they do not always agree on what a cluster bomb is, for example. So that way we really try to verify how comprehensive their policy is. And if we are convinced they exclude all cluster bombs from all investments, then we include them in the Hall of Fame. We also check whether they really have no investments, because a policy can be perfect, but you might not implement it very well, for example. So we really check for the Hall of Fame whether there are no investments at all. At other financial institutions that have a policy, but it's not really comprehensive, they are included in the runners-up of the report. And there are also some financial institutions in the runners-up that are also included in the Hall of Fame because their policy is not comprehensive. And either because of that or maybe because they do not implement it very well, they still make investments. And that sort of shows the need for their improved policies.
John?
Joan Anderson from SGI. My question is about more direct action aimed at the companies producing the weapons. I'm just interested to know if you're also doing that, because I know in the landmine campaign in the early days, certainly approaches to, the workers in the factories themselves put pressure on the companies to, I think it was in Italy actually, to stop manufacturing the weapons. So can you tell us about that?
Yes, not to the extent that the international campaign to ban landmines was doing, engaging directly with producers and the governments. But there are national campaigns that do that. For example, in beginning of this year, we launched a global action on one of the producers in South Korea, Wonsang, which targeted the producers, but through outreaching to financial institutions that invest in Pwonsang. And there were a significant number of national campaigns that took part in that action. And the national campaigns in South Korea have been approaching the producers, but some of the big banks in London, in Ottawa, in a lot of different countries, in the Netherlands, also in Italy, that you said probably the Italian campaign to ban landmine is familiar to you. They have been taking action. They are engaging with the parliamentarians. There is a draft policy that has been discussed for a long time, and they've been following up that to get it enacted in order to put a total ban. I also work for the international campaign to ban landmines, so it's very familiar, your questions on ICBL.
And maybe also in the United States, I think there were very extensive protests against Textron at their headquarters in Long Island, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Before wrapping up, I'll just two quick questions. First, did you request any meeting with the Japanese governmental authorities whatsoever, and if yes, were you granted?
So we'll be meeting a representative of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we are very happy to be talking with them. Also with the GPIF, we will be having a meeting. We've also tried very hard to get a meeting with Japanese financial institutions, but they do not seem very willing to meet, with the exception of the Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Bank, which we have always very good contacts with.
And we'll also have a meeting with members of Parliament. What you said, Diet? Diet. That's tomorrow, right? Tomorrow. So with a group of MPs, and we'll discuss the ban, the national legislation to ban all investments.
And then the last is out of curiosity. Usually when we have a list of bad countries or bad things, North Korea is always there. North Korea is not in this list. What does it mean? That you didn't get data, or they are not producing for once a bad thing?
So we have no evidence. Okay. But in the case of North Korea, I'm not sure that means very much. There are, for example, also producing of cluster munitions by Russian companies and by a Brazilian company. But in the case of the Russian companies, it's the same. We can either find no public information that confirms their production, or we cannot find public information about investments in those companies because there's just very much less publicly available information there.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you for attending this press conference. And on behalf of the Foreign Correspondent Club of Japan, I received from the office here 2 cluster envelopes. Make sure not drop them because there may be explosive. This is a honorary membership, right? Yeah, of 1 year.
Wow.
Thank you
So
very much.
you can come here possibly when you will have convinced all the financial institutions and we can all celebrate.
Celebrate together, exactly.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for coming.